Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the overlooked aging crisis, why 1 in 3 Americans over 65 will fall, and how resistance training is key to preserving balance, strength, and independence. And this is a topic I think that is really important for us to listen to today because there's so many people that are entering or are in their senior years and are experiencing, a decline in their physical vitality and, of course, the quality of life. And then, of course, this can lead to severe crisis. Of course, when a person falls, especially if they get after the age of 70, the damaging effects of that makes their health outcomes very unpleasant and not very positive. But we can avoid all that. And today's expert on the podcast is Dr. Alan Rozanski, who is a distinguished professor of medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai and director of nuclear cardiology at Mount Sinai St. Luke. And he's dedicated his career to exploring and pioneering research to help clients understand how to maintain and enhance vitality in their daily lives, combining his extensive expertise in cardiology, health psychology, and behavioral medicine with the guidance of his comprehensive health model, the 6 domains of health. Dr. Rozanski brings a unique perspective and makes him a compelling voice in the discussion of achieving and maintaining health and vitality in today's world. So, Dr. Allen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm honored that you've taken the time out of your busy schedules. Obviously, with your accomplishments and background, you have a packed day. So I really appreciate you joining here. Maybe, you have a couple unique things here in your bio for our listeners would like to kind of learn. And, of course, the rigors of getting into cardiology. My dad has gone through, he had a quintuple bypass surgery a number of years ago. And I was just thinking through the process, because of course you hear about people having heart surgery, but then I'm thinking, man, somebody's like, my dad's out under anesthesia, someone's holding his heart, carving it up, putting it back together, putting the rib cage back together, putting this, like, it blows my mind that people actually do this. And, it's just amazing the technology that we have today, which of course has increased lifespan significantly. My dad wouldn't be here with all the technology, and millions of Americans and people around the world have the same challenges that have been overcome by modern medicine. But what's interesting is you've also talked about really a preventative side and a behavioral side here. Can you explain to our listeners maybe what got you interested in the field of cardiology? How did you get to that point? What's it take to be a person of your credentials? And then why are these things that people might not think of a doctor doing that's opening up people's hearts or looking at people's hearts and stuff, or you're bringing in these behavioral elements from a longevity perspective? I think cardiovascular disease is still the number 1 killer of Americans, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and so I think you want to avoid coming into your office at the you're the last guy I want to see, but the first guy I want to talk about this subject. So please enlighten our listeners to your background, what got you interested in this.
Sure. Well, it's a story and a journey, but I'll shorten it very concisely. When I was in medical school, and we had, this was a Tufts Medical School, we had different rotations on different floors. It could be GI, it could be pulmonary, it could be cardiology. And I was assigned to the cardiology floor, and I instantly fell in love with it. There was something about taking the history of a patient with chest pain, which I found very absorbing and interesting, trying to make the diagnosis connecting to the patient. So that explains cardiology. Eventually, I did a cardiology fellowship, and in my second year, we had a grand round speaker who was scheduled to speak on stress testing. And about 3 weeks beforehand, he couldn't make it. And my chief of cardiology came to me and said to me, "You're going to give the grand rounds." I said, "Me? Come on." But I was assigned the subject, and I researched it in depth, and I became fascinated by all the aspects of putting people on treadmills, evaluating them, seeing how they perform. And that got me involved in the exercise part of cardiology very early. And that brought me into a subspecialty field called nuclear cardiology, as you alluded to. And for your audience, that simply is where we inject the patients with a radioisotope that goes to the heart while they're on a bike or on a treadmill. And we can image the heart in different ways. One of the ways we can do it is looking at the wall motion of the heart. So what happens is in a normal person, if you put them on a bike and they exercise, the walls start contracting much more vigorously. But if someone has a blockage, one of the coronary arteries, that wall that supplies by the blockage will start to slow down and even stop moving with exercise. We can image that and diagnose heart disease. So what happened, this was back in the 1980s, we were putting ambulatory EKGs on people. This was a new technology to look at the people's electrocardiogram during daily life activity. And we began to notice that people were getting these episodes while driving and doing what seemed like not much physical activity. And I began to wonder, is this maybe due to mental stress? So we devised a protocol where we took the patients into the lab, and before we exercised them, we imaged them doing a series of mental tasks, one of which was to just have the patient speak about the stress in their lives. And what happened with these early patients was that with those with heart disease, a number of them, while they were speaking about losing their job or some other emotional issue, their walls would stop slowing down, and wall might even stop moving the same way it did with exercise. And when I saw this was my aha moment. It was like, hey, wait, this mind-body relationship is truly real. And by the way, that finding has been reproduced in about 30 studies. And so that began my journey into looking at not just, cardiology from a normal point of view, but in terms of what are the factors other than exercise that affect the heart, both in the short term, but also in the long term.
It's really neat, because so much of I think the requisites inside of the field, especially with the compartmentalization of science and the medical industry, it's unique that you've been able to make that bridge, because you have a lot of kind of the woo-woo crowd that talks about this, but they don't have the scientific background in order to make that connection or to validate their perspective. But here's someone coming from where, the rigors of, like I said, dealing with people's hearts, like the cost of failure in your business is death. It's not about just being wrong. It's about you need to be right. But it's really cool that you made that bridge.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your career and afterwards. How did that impact, how you dealt with patients, or how you looked at the lifespan of an individual, and maybe key points, especially in this, post 65 age, and there's so many people in that group. What was that journey like for you?
Sure. Well, after doing this research, I also was able to parlay this research into a sabbatical fellowship from the MacArthur Foundation to study health promoting and health damaging behaviors. And as part of that sabbatical, while I was still at my hospital at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles at the time, I was able to visit psychophysiologists working in many campuses around the country. And I was really exposed to the best and the brightest, and developed a deep respect for how carefully they did their research. And so that research started to really blossom in the 1980s. It was really the birth of a field we now call behavioral medicine. And there was new data coming out at that time, which now we accept as ho hum, but in those days showing for the first time that things like depression was a major risk factor for heart disease. And I remember there's a lot of skepticism at that time, but I became someone who studied everything that everybody was doing and started to try to put it together. It wasn't like I was doing all the research, but I was synthesizing the research and developed eventually a model of health that I say I didn't make it up. It's just studying what the body says is healthy and unhealthy. And based on that, I came to these 6 domains of health.
It's pretty cool. One of the fascinating elements that I think have happened literally over the course of my lifetime is kind of the change in perspective of society about being less fatalistic. As the new data came out and talking about that health is the new wealth. We're living longer than we ever have before. Although recent, I think since COVID, we've had a decline of the life expectancy. But now people are kind of driving into this quality of life element. So, back in 2003, I believe I read an article out of the New England Journal of Medicine. It was edited a bit from the Bush administration at the time, simply because the health outcomes for the generations to come were looking less positive than the generations before, which was the first time in American history, meaning that not only would we see an age decline, but we would also see a significant drop in the quality of life, particularly in the last 20 years, where people on a variety of pharmaceutical interventions or whatever. And I felt personally is like, well, they're really over relying on the medical community, which are really the last line of defense in a lot of ways. It's like you're going into the hospital, you got chest pains or something. You got to that place by a bunch of choices that you made in your life, consciously or unconsciously, combined with your genetics. So when you started developing these kind of 6 categories of frameworks, maybe you can unpack that and how you started to integrate this when you're dealing with your patients, either pre or post, like a cardiac issue.
Sure. So basically, we can define those things as healthy, and everyone will agree, is those things that protect your physiology, decrease your risk of a chronic illness, and promote longevity. Exercise does that, healthy sleep, good nutrition does that, smoking, being sedentary does the opposite. So that's unhealthy. But that's all one domain, the physical domain. If you take the cognitive domain, there's data now very clear, very reproducible, that optimists live longer, pessimists don't. Optimists have less heart disease, pessimists do have more. So that's a paradigm in terms of the cognitive area. It's also true in terms of a sense of gratitude. There's newer data now with outcome data that people who have a strong sense of gratitude actually live longer. So it's a legitimate health domain. So that's the second domain. The third domain is in the emotional realm. So I mentioned depression, and it's very interesting that there's a stepwise increase in your risk according to how depressed you may feel. And when people are really depressed, our body physiologically goes haywire. The stress hormones are elevated, your amygdala enlarges, insulin resistance becomes substantial, you develop visceral fat and inflammation. So it's unhealthy. Positive emotions have been shown to promote longevity. So there's your third domain, evidence-based, the body testifying. The fourth domain would be in the social realm. So this was dated back in the 1970s, was called the Alameda County study. At the time, it was revolutionary. And what they did is they studied people in Alameda County, California, and they found, and lo and behold, that those who had a larger social network, belonged to more community groups, for example, lived longer. And there was a stepwise relationship between the size of your social network and your health. Then a few years later, data came out in terms of the quality of your relationships. And ever since then, there are hundreds of studies, meta-analyses showing the potency of your social life as a health benefit, and loneliness is the opposite. The fifth domain, and one that really has been developed more in the last 15 years, and very importantly, is your sense of purpose. People who have a strong sense of life purpose also live longer. And the sixth domain would be in terms of how you manage stress. And that one's interesting because there's this U-shaped relationship between well-being and the amount of stress you have. So people who have toxic stress, so that would be the stress that's overwhelming, a lot of emotional negativity, you don't feel you can control it. That's clearly unhealthy. But it turns out that people who are bored also don't have as good a quality of life as people who have a sense of purpose in their life, who are taking on challenges, meeting challenges. Those are the things that produce self-esteem and more confidence, more optimism, and better health. So there's your 6 domains.
It's really cool. I read an article years ago that was produced by Dr. David Hawkins, who had one of the first attitudinal healing centers, and he was dealing with patients who were on a terminal situation, and they were using a book, I think it was called The Course in Miracles, and they were going through this. And the outcomes, both from a longevity, quality of life, and then some of them actually made recoveries under illnesses that they couldn't by changing their attitude. And I thought that was pretty. He was an expert in
Sure,
psychiatry.
sure. There's a lot of data like that, Data shows clearly that people who are optimistic, have better outcomes after surgery, many studies like that.
What is I guess the biochemical side of that behavioral or attitudinal or having, a strong vision of the future? What goes on inside of the body, both in a positive case and then in a negative case, to convert this to the left brainers so that they can understand what's going on here and the importance of what you're saying?
Sure. So the positive and negative are like a little bit like flip sides, but not completely. On the positive side, people who are, let's say, optimistic or have, better quality of social life, etc., there seems to be that this squares better with better physiology, better insulin sensitivity, less risk of inflammation, and things like that. So that's one aspect of it. A very big part of it, I believe, is just the relationship empirically between these psychological states and health habits. The data is very clear. People who are pessimistic or depressed or lonely or don't have a sense of life purpose, they're more likely to have a poor diet, gain weight, smoke, etc. And the health habits, I think, is a big intermediary aspect of how people function in terms of the health risk. And then these factors are in the psychological domain, they kind of travel together, right? When you're more optimistic, when you have a greater sense of purpose, you're more proactive, you're more likely to have a better social life. So you have better overall resilience. And that sense of resilience is very important in dealing with illness.
That's really important, insightful that you're taking this research and demonstrating it. So, what are your recommendations, I guess, on a daily habits, or what you're instructing your patients and your greater sense of influence to do in order to live their best life? Because I think I can go back to when I was a kid, and they had this whole concept of Freedom 55. I don't know if you remember those advertisements, but it was like, you need to get to 55, and we got this investment program, and then you're just going to sit on the beach and you're going to just live this blissful existence drinking margaritas in the Caribbean or something. And then you look at the data that says people that retire or whatever, if they don't find something else to do, like they're dead like at 18 months, like their whole life goes down. So how do you marry, I guess, the physiological elements that people need to do on a day-to-day basis with the psychological elements, especially because maybe they were conditioned to an expectation of, I'm getting older now, I don't have new friends, I'm retiring, I'm slowing down, I'm not going to, that there's kind of a general social lexicon that says, oh, what are you doing this at 70? You're going out and taking tap dancing or learning a new language, or you're, decided to sign up with the local boys and girls clubs or something. What is that factor to get people out of maybe the declining sense of social connection and a suboptimal attitude to flipping that? How are you able to do that for people?
Well, that's a great question. And there's so many ways I could answer that. The first thing that came to my mind as you started posing the question was that old truism where they said, you'll remember, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So the apple's the paradigm for, do these things, in terms of positive health habits and just in the physical domain. If you will do that, the data shows you can decrease your risk of chronic disease by about 70%. So that's pretty good. But where do you start? So you're asking me a question. If someone comes into my office, how can I be healthier? The first place I'm going to start is make sure you're moving. That's the first start with everybody. Are you exercising? We were built with two strong limbs on the bottom, Cadillacs, if you will, to move around. And the data is so clear. We'll have debates on different diets, but the data is so clear about the more you move, the better your health is going to be, the more vital you're going to feel. You're going to touch practically all of the important physiological systems in your body and make them more resilient. So the goal is to get people moving. If you deal with, then you have to specify the question. If you're dealing with someone who's been really sedentary, the first thing is I would show them the data that shows that the biggest bang for your buck is when you go from being sedentary to doing any physical activity. If you go from being sedentary to, let's say, walking moderately briskly, a walk for 10 minutes a day, you're going to decrease your risk of mortality over the next 10 years by about 20%, which would be equivalent to using a statin. So that is important data. And, I find you can motivate people to, do that little more that they can do and impress upon them that a little means a lot. I call it getting on the playing field. So the first goal I have with anybody is to getting them on the playing field. And the first place I start is by having them move.
Now, one of the elements that you kind of alluded to also in your bio was the role of strength training, and how, for our listeners, does that differentiate from, say, just walking? Because I come from a very rural community, and it's interesting. My mom walks twice a day, every day. She's had very little health issues. My dad hates walking, right? And I'm trying to continually, over the last 20 years, tell my dad, you gotta walk, Dad, you gotta walk. Now, he'll walk if there's a purpose. If he's got work or labor to do, he'll walk all day and be fine. If he's just got to walk, all of a sudden he like, oh, I'm tired, my leg hurts. Like he's got a million different subconscious elements. And then the other element I've added is that not only do you need to walk, Dad, I need you to do strength training quite a couple times a week. And I can't get him over the hump. So part of it is a personal element, but I suspect that there's a lot of caring children that have their parents up there, or maybe one of our listeners are in that zone. Is like, how do you move from just being on the playing field to proactively improving your musculature, I guess, because, at a certain point, muscle becomes the limiting factor, especially when walking, because the deceleration rate. So if you look at all the accidents, most of them are happening, from my understanding, is not going up an incline, but it's actually stepping off, and you don't have the muscle mass to break the body, and you start losing balance, and then you tip, and then bang, down you go, a broken hip, then you're really immobilized, and it's a downward spiral from that. So how do you get them from the playing field to the gym or to some sort of
Yeah,
resistance training?
great question. And I'll tell you the secret. But I want to say an anecdote first. It just happened this past weekend, which was I was at a social event and I saw someone there who is a caterer in my community. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I went and said hello to him. And he gave me the firmest of handshakes. So I walked away, and then I walked back to him. I said, wait a second, I got to ask you, that was really quite a handshake. Like, do you work out? And he said, no, but in my job, I'm lifting boxes and being very physically active all day long. And as he said that, I'll tell you, I was jealous. I was jealous because if you have a job today where you naturally are physically active like that, that's a great blessing. That's an insurance policy for your health. Now, before I explain all the benefits, you asked me how you get people on the field. So this is how I do with every single one of those 6 domains. I call it the power of the first step. Can I get you on the playing field? So in terms of resistance training, it seems like if you haven't done it, like, what do I do? Where do I go? Most people think you got to go to the gym and you need like a trainer, and they don't know what to do. So I say, choose one exercise. Let's get you to do one thing that you will do each day. My favorite for someone who's completely sedentary would be just to do a sit to stand. Sit in a chair, have your hands up against your chest, and just get up. Lean a little forward and get up without using your hands. Go back down, back up, back down. Actually, there's a test to measure strength based on the sit to stand, the number you can do in 30 seconds. But that's a good one to start with. Or you can have them do calf raises, or just a step up. Slowly step up and then step down on a stair. The idea is to get them on the playing field. Not to worry about how many I'm doing, but to develop that sense of doing something. And that's how you get them going. That's how you get them going, one step at a time. It's same with physical activity. I'm not taking someone who's sedentary and trying to get them to meet the guidelines, which would say, 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise 5 times a week. No, we want psychological success before aerobic success. So if I could get them to do 5 minutes per day, then we're getting someplace. And by the way, it's easier said than done. I mean, I have plenty of experience with patients where, that I tried that and that didn't work. So and we all have that experience. There's some things that we just not committed to doing, or just, yeah, I'll get to it, but it's tomorrow. Many reasons why we don't get to things, but that's the trick, just to start with something, put your seed in the ground, and then you build from there.
What do you think is the profile of someone who was living a sedentary lifestyle or not doing the things that they needed to do, but somehow did a 180 after seeing you, started it maybe in a dire condition? Or what are the patterns that you're noticing in behavior from that person to go from completely resistant to that eye to embracing it, and then scaling up through the process and really enjoying that best phase of life, perhaps when you're not so dependent on working and paying the bills and stuff, and actually just living a high quality life? Like, what is it that you noticed dealing with all those clients that are the people that make that jump and are successful at moving down that pathway?
It's never any one thing, we all have at times in lives where we hear advice and we have an insight and we say, wow, and we actually feel changed at the time, but then we don't, hop on it. We don't change. As opposed to someone I'd call an epiphany, where you have had an insight which was so powerful that you changed. And we know that people who, let's say have a loved one who had a heart attack, or they had a heart attack, or, they had there was something that moved them about someone who was very inspiring to them that they met, and these things are nonlinear, and often they just come on when people are ready, where they weren't ready before. So I don't think there's any magic formula to it.
So again, on going back to those 6 pillars, you talked about the social side of it and the connection. So let's say, you have a person in that 65 plus category. They've seen a change in their life. Maybe they've retired. They don't have the social interactions at work. Maybe their spouse is, having complications, or they've passed away, or, the kids have all moved out and they're in different cities, and all of a sudden there's a reduction of their life. And a big part of what you're messaging is those social connections are almost as valuable, if not more so, than just the exercise itself. What are what are the things that they can do on that side of the equation to kind of get them, going in the right direction?
Same thing, power of the first step, is there a old friend you can connect with? Can you go to the community center and connect with somebody new? Can you join some group? Volunteering, that's a big one. The data is very clear that people who are older who volunteer live longer. The power not just of social connection, but the power of giving. So there's many opportunities if you determine to do it.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've noticed with volunteering in particular. Oftentimes, most people, especially in North America, don't realize we're living at the greatest time ever in the history of humanity in their life. Even if you're at the lower echelons of society here, like it's still way better than most people have ever had it in their entire world lives. Yet so often they're looking at life through, oh, my glass is not even half full. It's like there's only a drop, and somehow I'm not good enough, or I'm not stuff, or they don't do that. But then they go off and they go to a volunteer situation, or they help someone that's in need, and they realize, oh, well, that person's in way worse condition than I am. Like, actually, my life's pretty good, and it kind of flips the equation. I think that's one of the powers of volunteering, or contributing to people who are in a distressed situation. And I come from a small community in Canada, and I had 3 centenarians, excuse me, yeah, not Roman soldiers, centenarians on my street. One lady lived to be 106 years old, and I was always I watched, what did they do? They were all had gardens, so they were gardening every day, which is hard work. Gardening is tough. Second, they were all involved in some sort of community element. They were members of the Women's Institute, or they were part of the Rotary Club, or they were part of the fair planning. Like there was a social element. And I think in smaller towns sometimes people lean on that a little bit more. In big towns, it's you can kind of be a stranger lost in the mass of society, yet there's all these pockets of that. What are some areas that people you find if they don't know where to go or where to start on the social side, where's the best areas for them to look if they're in a city or in a town or those type of things?
I think it's variable, right, comparing to whether it is a city or a town or whatever. But I think that within most geographic regions, there are different, community activities. You know, just getting out there, even going to the gym, even if you're alone, so you feel lonely and you're retiring. You say, hey, wait, I wish my network was larger. When you start going to the gym and you start hanging out there, you're going to start to make friends. You're going to become a familiar face. You're going to even feel like you belong, even if you don't belong yet, So those are all things. Another aspect of it that maybe is indirect, but maybe ignored is having a sense of purpose, because that's a way to connect to people and humanity, like I'm doing things which are connected to, important things in the scheme of things for people. And that can soften the feeling of loneliness that a person can have as well.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. Leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
There was a famous book called The Purpose-Driven Life. I think it was, I think it's one of the best-selling books in North America. And I think that's a big challenge as people get older, sometimes feeling that they don't have a purpose and I'll just kind of whittle away the hours. How has cultivating a sense of purpose translated in the data, maybe that in your experience? Like, what are you seeing that's happening? Is like, hey, doc, you know what? I started walking and, I went to the gym and the next thing you know, I joined the volunteer group and now I'm helping out at the Boys and Girls Club a little bit. And you see that. Well, what is that big element on the purpose side that you see shifting? I think maybe a reason to live, and I think I'm a big believer in this. In fact, I'll give an anecdotal story where you think about it for a second. And my parents were flying out here. I just had a baby boy last year. He just turned 1. And so last Christmas, my parents were flying out for the first time to see their son. Now, unfortunately, the trip was, there was delays. It was Christmas time and everything. My parents are in their late 70s. They were trashed. I mean, they were really, when I picked them up at the airport, I'm like, oh, wow, okay, they're beat up pretty good from this long trip because they're traveling from New Brunswick, Canada, all the way to the west coast of the United States. So I'm like, okay. And I watched them come into the house and I'm carrying their bags. We're going up the stairs into the house. And the second they saw their grandson, it was their first grandchild ever. When they saw him, I literally watched like about 10 years come after him. And they went from dead tired, couldn't think, to laughing and playing with their grandson and getting down on the floor and being silly and everything. And I was like, this is like amazing. Like I literally watched them go from totally burnt to like invigorated and excited in a few seconds.
Yeah.
Well, I want to capture that essence because I think, and my dad said after the trip, he says, I've got to make sure that I make it to see him as a teenager because I want to see him grow up. Like there was a perceptual shift I never heard my dad say anything like that, but there was all of a sudden there was a purpose. And what is how do we elicit that for people to rediscover their purpose in life, which may be different than what they've done in the past or an extension of like and how important that is for you for your work.
Yeah, it's such an important question and topic. You know, if you look at the literature, I mean, if you go back even biblical, I mean, the sense of purpose is emphasized, in
Hmm.
religions and in Aristotle. Maslow had his famous hierarchy of needs, and self-actualization was at the top of that. Carolyn Rick, she's a famous psychologist in Michigan, and she has this six basic needs model and emphasizes the importance of having a sense of purpose. So that's all there. But the medical world was like Johnny come lately to this. The first epidemiological studies where we actually measured people's sense of purpose and health outcomes was only about 15 years ago. But the data has boomed since then. I'm telling you, there's a tremendous awareness, I believe, developing in the medical community among that. Now, another reason why this has become a big issue is, as you mentioned, people are living longer, and with the blessings, the amazing blessings of modern technologies and medicine, we can keep people alive much longer. So then it becomes an issue. Okay, well, what am I living to as I get older? And what I say is, you can retire from your job, but you can never retire your need for purpose. Once you do that, that's where, a plant needs water to keep growing. A human being needs a sense of purpose to stay alive. Once you don't have that, you just begin to wither. So people have often trouble with retirement because they haven't planned for it. And their idea was, hey, I'll go to play golf, go to the beach, hang out with friends, but they really haven't planned for something. So I say the analogy is like, you go to the beach, right? And you have been there like a day and a half, and then all of a sudden you're bolt upright. What else is to do here in this paradise? Because you just can't keep lying on the beach. A human being has to get up and do things. So you always have to feed your sense of purpose, but you can always do it, you know. So that's the key. You can't retire. So really prophylactically, if people can develop interests in their midlife or from young life on, and just have it on a playing field, have things that you're dreaming that, gee, when I get older and I leave my job, I'm not leaving to just retire. I'm leaving for my second career. I'm leaving to give in a way I didn't before. I'm leaving to pursue hobbies and talents I didn't have time to develop. Really, old age is a gift if you can stay healthy, right?
So if we're looking at, your typical person, they're getting into retirement age. Typically, if they don't find these things, what's the life expectancy or the quality of life versus if they kind of engage in the six pillars that you've kind of outlined here? What's the difference in the outcome overall?
Well, we don't have specific hard data that I can translate into years. I mean, there are data coming out from Harvard looking at specific health habits like exercise, good nutrition, and its impact on health. And some data suggesting as much as 14 years if you do all the right physical habits, exercise, don't smoke, sleep well, eat well. So that data is pretty profound. In terms of a sense of purpose, there's a lot of that data centered on older adults and their sense of purpose. And in one study, which was the MacArthur study on successful aging, they asked people in the 70 age group, there was 70, I think, to 79, to what sense do you feel useful in life? And those who reported not feeling useful had about a threefold increase in mortality risk over the length of the follow-up study compared to people who felt useful. So that's pretty profound data.
Yeah, that's wild. So if you were to break down, let's say on a week to week basis, kind of like the all-star profile of someone that's going to live their best life as they move forward in life, what would that look like for people so they can kind of capture a vision, the Tom Brady version of aging, if you will? What would it be? What would it look like?
Well, if you mentioned Tom Brady, they can be usual, right? I mean,
Right.
really extremely dedicated. But let's give the usual pattern. That would be great. I would emphasize walking, exercising, doing
How
something.
much walking? How much walking a day?
Um, depends where you've been. So if you've been sedentary, let's get up to 5-10 minutes a day. Once, if you've been, already fit, let's, try to exercise 3 to 4 times or maybe every day. Sometimes it's easier to do it every day, but that's only one part of it. Just if we just stick with that part, we have automated a lot of life. We have today, you can get by with 1,000 steps, right? I mean, you can shop online, you can order all your food, you could literally do nothing. And unfortunately, I think some people do. But there's data that's come out from what's called the UK Biobank study. This was a study of over 70,000 individuals and have a lot of biomarkers, a lot of outcome variables to look at. And they slapped on about 70,000 of these people a wrist accelerometer and studied how much physical activity they were doing over the course of a week. And then they followed them for a number of years. And they showed that the amount of incidental physical activity you got was important in their health outcomes. In one of the studies, they just looked at people who were sedentary. So they weren't looking at people who exercise, but they found that those people who were getting bouts of 2 or more minutes of, more vigorous physical activity, which might be, sharp, parking a little further from the shopping mall, were actually living longer. So, these steps, take the steps instead of the escalator or the elevator, walk farther away, go to, maybe walk to the post office if it's in far. These things are important and they promote your health. And they also, promote your mind health. So that's why I would say develop a physically active lifestyle. I'm going to be active in my daily life. I'm going to try to, get, some bouts of physical activity in. And then in terms of the resistance exercises, people you've got to stress your muscles, so we call it muscle care. So if you're not, doing resistance training, you are going to lose, even from the age of 30 on, you're starting to lose about 3 to 8% of your muscle mass per decade. And that accelerates after age 60. And that can be largely, not completely, but largely mitified if you are doing resistance training. So, that promotes better immunological health, biochemical health, better mindset, expect greater sense of resilience, stronger muscles, and you decrease your risk of falling, which is one of the things you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. So what does that involve? That involves dedicating about a half hour twice a week to doing a set of exercises. And by the way, those can be broken down into small bits. I call them these resistance snacks or exercise snacks. So you can do, a couple exercises for your, exercise your core, your upper body, and your lower limbs. And if you develop a repertoire of 5 or 6 of those exercises, you're accomplishing something important. If you want to do more, actually going to the gym and perhaps working with a trainer if you can, which I would highly recommend just to make sure you got proper form and technique, is a tremendous investment in terms of your life. So that is number 1 and 2, exercise and good muscle care. Should I continue? Do you have a question?
Yeah, keep going, because I also want to get into the elements of this, the social elements too. What you're seeing is like, like what kind of social interactions do they need in order to kind of fulfill this kind of ultimate version of themselves?
So then we get into nutrition and, how do we unpack something that, should be intuitive and easy, but has become very complicated because there's so much research and a lot of contradictory messages out to the public. So, basically we know that vegetables, fruits, nuts, all that kind of stuff is healthy. People have debated about, red meat, cheese, whole fat milk versus low fat milk. The data with saturated fats really, it's not the big concern, put it that way, that people, that some people have had. The key thing is avoiding, a lot of highly processed foods, a lot of sugars, a lot of highly starched meals, all the M&Ms, all the too much pizza, soft drinks, all of that kind of stuff. 60% of the calories of a typical American diet come from highly processed foods. Now, some of those aren't necessarily unhealthy, but the best place to start with nutrition is making sure, am I eating good food? Am I getting enough vegetables, salads, fruits, fish, lean meat, all those kind of important nuts, all those kind of things into my diet. And overall, am I watching my weight so that whatever weight I'm at, I'm not trying to put any more pounds than I have. So that's the nutrition area. And then sleep. I mean, we cut down on sleep because we have so many things to do. But the data is pretty clear that getting adequate sleep is quite healthy for your health, for your overall health.
And then on the social sense of purpose side, what are some key drivers on that, like for interactions of the most successful patients, of how often are they involved in community service or some purpose-driven aspect to their lives?
So the biggest mistake we make on the social side, and I've made in my life, is that although we have this need ultimately to be socially connected to other people, and it becomes really important when we're not filling ourselves up with other competing priorities, in midlife, we can completely sublimate our need for, social connections. We can have our friends, stay in touch by text messages and so forth, because we're so busy with our jobs, maybe raising a family, developing new skills in our 24/7 economy. And we just say, I'll occasionally stay in touch with friends. And when we move from one place to another, we often let go of some of those friendships. So, I had good friends in high school, of which I only have one now. Medical school, I had good friends, but when I moved on to, training in cardiology in a different city, I lost those, and on, and I regret that I didn't keep up with some of those friendships. Now, fortunately, I'm involved in my community and I feel good about that, but I wish I had not sublimated that, which is so easy to do. So what happens, it's a kind of a deferral trap where people are so busy in their midlife, they reach older age, and then, they maybe even have a strong sense of purpose, but our social needs grow again very substantially as we get older. And so maintaining, good connections during midlife is very important and often overlooked.
Yeah, I think it's so underestimated. And of course, if I think of how life was maybe 100 years ago or even less than that, I'm kind of in a community that's frozen in time a little bit. And you knew your aunties and uncles and the grandchildren and great grandchildren, etc. I have an uncle and an aunt that they lived up in. My uncle's still alive. He's in his 90s. My aunt just recently passed away after, interesting enough, prior to, she had a bad hip fall. She had a bad fall in the hip, and she never really fully came back from that, and things just continued to decline. But they played music for the seniors. They played in a band. They travel around to these events. They're involved in volunteer, and they had grandchildren and great grandchildren. And so in that sort of environment, it's easier to kind of maintain social circles with family, extended family. Little Johnny or little Annie's got to go to a recital, so we're going to go to church and watch the church thing, or we're going to watch the school play or whatever. And there's a sense that you're forced into it almost by family obligations, and you're like, oh, actually that was kind of fun, and then you ran into an old friend or whatever. But in cities, I think sometimes it's even more isolating. Do you see a difference between like urban life versus rural life, or in those outcomes?
That's an interesting question. I really don't know. I relate to your point, the way life was, and it was more naturally built. And you can feel very lonely in a big crowd, right? So sometimes city life can be tough in that respect because you're around many people, and if you don't have your friendships, that can be a problem. On the other hand, cities are a place where there are more social activities occurring, and people can have a great social life in a city. So I think it's very individual. I don't think it's necessarily dependent on geography per se.
Yeah, I think it's also just adapting to where you are and how well you do. You know, humans are successful because we're one of the most adaptable species on the
Yeah.
planet, and it's why we live in all these different areas and have all these opportunities. And some people are more inclined for the rural life. Some people are more inclined for city life because of their personal interests.
Yes.
Um, I guess another question I have, because right now, anti-aging medicine is kind of the rage right now in the use of hormones, peptides, etc. And I know for a fact, or I'm actually curious, I don't know for a fact. I'm curious particularly about heart outcomes for people who have compromised hearts or have gone through some sort of medical situation with their heart and relate it to anti-aging medicine. Because a lot of people say, well, testosterone could, like testosterone replacement therapy, which is really popular now, may have complications on the heart or may have benefits on the heart, or if they're doing various peptides or other elements. What are you noticing being inside of the field of the outcome of, say, some of these anti-aging, to use that word loosely, or hormone optimization protocols for a better quality of life and its impact on the heart particularly?
I tell you, I don't travel in that circle. The data with testosterone is interesting, but what comes to mind to me is that, as we get older, the one thing that is declining is, physical strength and so forth. But overall, if you would say what's the goal in aging, is that, I maintain you can be every bit as energetic when you're 90 as when you were 19. In other words, you can't have the same physical energy, but the other components in terms of wisdom and enjoying how you grew and how you overcame, certain difficulties and the life experiences you gained and the depth of your relationships, and the quality of the meaning that you can have. Or like you said with your father, right? I mean, he came to visit you and now he's gained 14 more years, right? So
Let's hope even more.
that's the anti-aging medicine that I dwell in. So I really haven't paid attention much to the testosterone story.
Got it. Yeah, I'm curious about them. I've seen arguments for and against, but I don't know where that lies at the set. My sense is if someone's in a real state of declination or whatever, it might be a good opportunity. If there's these other areas that you could take care of first, I would always start there first and then use these as adjuncts. Because anytime you're using an intermediary elements, there are both benefits and costs of that. And so it's always a trade-off.
In the medical sense, yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
So, what do you feel? I know there's a lot of, a lot of the people in my sphere of influence come from the what they call the biohacking influence. I like to call it biological optimization. I'm not a big hack type of person. I always say there's consequences to a hack. If you hack a computer, well, that could get you somewhere, but it could also get you somewhere that you don't want to be. But an optimization, which is essentially what you're discussing today, how do you optimize the potential for outcome? Nobody can prevent getting hit by a bus or a car accident or something like that that could take you out. But in regards to cardiovascular health, are there any elements that you would ensure on the nutrition side? Because everyone's hawking, if you take this or you take that, you're going to live to be 120 or 130 or 150. And, who knows what it would seem that the biological limits right now are somewhere around 120 because we don't know about too many people that's gone past that age. And certainly 100 seems to be a real uh, demarker of hyper excellence in aging. What do you feel gives people on the nutrition side that they're lacking that they may need to supplement with or they need to make sure that they get from in their diet that you see that could lead to better outcomes from cardiovascular perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to have all of the good nutrients, the vegetables, the fruits give you the flavonoids, the antioxidants, all the nutritious, elements you need in that respect. Protein, and protein needs to go up with age. So it's important as you get older to make sure eating enough protein. There's a lot of interest today in ways to control weight, like with intermittent fasting and so forth, but you have to be careful in terms of, making sure you're not, that you're getting enough of the elements, particularly protein during the course of the day. Nuts, all these good sources of protein. And as I said, avoiding too much of the toxic stuff, the fake foods, the cakes, the pastries, all that kind of stuff, which, I know when I have one cookie, I always want more. So it's, it's a lot about food is actually, I think, controlling your own personal food environment. What are you buying? What are you bringing into the house? What are you tempting yourself with? The other thing I'd say about nutrition is interesting is that we've lived in a world today where things are so fast that we, in a way, have lost a little bit of our ability to just appreciate eating per se. So much we're eating when we're on the run, when we're doing other things, multitasking. So just sitting and pausing and, being a little bit more of a connoisseur in terms of the enjoyment of your food, I think would help people in terms of appetite and in terms of actually enjoying food. So I think that's an element I would emphasize as well.
Yeah, as I traveled the world and sampled various diets from different places, I always felt that the Japanese just did a great job on that side. If you look at their portions and the presentation and the cultural aspects of sitting down and mindfulness involved in their
Yeah.
eating. I was in Okinawa about 15 years ago, and of course it's known as one of the most robust health places, and I was impacted by both the quality of the food's high mineral rich soil, and I tried all these different vegetables and stuff. I was like, wow, you could feel the potency in it. What was ironic, though, is I went back a year and a half ago, and Okinawa's changed a lot. And I saw I went to the airport. I couldn't believe the difference. There was all these candies and sugars and all this stuff. And then I went and I saw the population, and I could see the change in the health of the population. People were heavier. They were becoming more Americanized
Yeah.
in their, and they had such a interesting longevity perspective, both socially and culturally and dietary wise. But I started to see those influences breeding in over that 15-year period. I'm like, wow, I wonder what the outcomes are going to be, in the next 20, 30 years in that particular culture. But I love that aspect about becoming a connoisseur. I have a theory, and that is the process of aging actually forces efficient distribution of your energy. And when you're young, you can have all this energy, but it can be dispersed in ways that aren't necessarily productive or best for your health. But as you get older and there's a little bit diminishment of the life force, it's like, okay, I'm now going to refine my choices in a way because I've learned, I've got some wisdom. And if I can refine those choices, I can still maintain a real high quality of health because I'm not taking the excess energy and wasting it. I'm using what I have and I'm putting it in a productive way. And the people that I've celebrated and learned from are individuals who are doing that in their seniors. And frankly, they're more vibrant than many of the young people that are 20, 30 years longer. And vibrancy is something that we can feel when a person walks in the room. Their energy, their enthusiasm. Like you said, how do you shake your hand? You're like, what's going on with that guy? What's like, it's immediate and we can pick up on it. It's a je ne sais quoi, as they say, but it's definitely something you can feel.
Yes.
I think with this, I would like for you to share any closing ideas that we didn't cover on this for individuals who are saying, you know what, I really like what Dr. Allen's saying. I want to go forward in this. What are some last words that you want to say? Resources that you may provide in order to kind of guide them on that thing, or where they can get more information and things like that to
Sure.
kind of follow that?
Yeah, well, in terms of resources, I do have a website. It's under my name, alanrozanski.com. And I actually have blogs on each of the 6 domains of health and covered some of these topics in pretty substantial depth. So they can do that. And I'm also active on LinkedIn. I would say this, in terms of the areas we covered, one that I would maybe emphasize we didn't is in the mental domain, really.
Please, let's bring it up.
The power of gratitude. Just taking that time out, to count your blessings. It's a truism that everybody hears as a yeah, that's of course important, but yet taking that time out and just counting your blessings. We're built to just be doers and notice what's wrong. we have to work on it. And it's a powerful, powerful thing to develop, that sense of gratitude. It becomes a mindset where you say, wait, who said I was entitled to my health? Who said I was entitled to, my blessings, my house, my family? Thank God I have it, and feeling it makes a difference. You feel it's powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah, I saw something recently about rather than just doing affirmations, forming the affirmations in the form of a question. Why am I so healthy? Or why am I so grateful? Or why am I so happy? Or, why am I so energetic? Or all of those things. By just taking the why, it activates the reticular activating system to start looking for the reasons. And one of the things I've always used when I coached all the clients and stuff, I said, look, if you understand psychological perception and some of the distorted elements of our own psychology and its impact, it's like no one really knows what reality is. We're just telling ourselves a story about it. So why not tell you a story that you like, that makes you feel good and make you feel invigorated, and start telling that story. And I found that was a great way to flip the script on people, to start creating a subconscious narrative that led them in a direction to look for the things that supported those reasons. That might sound airy-fairy, but framing a question gets the brain looking for those answers. And I think that's a big value. Can you go ahead?
No, I was just going to say that what you just described is a whole area of psychology called metacognition. The ability to see your interpretations is just your interpretations as opposed to reality. And once you realize that, well, why don't I have better interpretations? Why don't I work on that? Better reframing, absolutely. Absolutely.
Super powerful. This has been a delightful interview, and I'm going to put all the show links in the show notes here for people as they're listening. And I would encourage people to follow Dr. Allen, because it's like going to the gym. When you get nuanced information or something that can transform yourself or a process, you need to keep going back to the source, to keep reactivating what you learned today and activating into a cultivating. So I'm hopeful that you become a voice of encouragement and reason for our listeners so that they can live their best life. That's, of course, our goal and our purpose at Bioptimizers, is to help humans live a longer, stronger, better life. And you do this by cultivating the habits, the attitudes, and the relationships that allows you to make life worth living. So you'll continue to do those things. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. And I'm very grateful to that you did this. This is really fun. And I can see by the radiance that you're practicing what you preach. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight. Thank you.
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes, as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others, is a total game changer. Suddenly, you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with Masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.